I can't even imagine. Have you heard those words and thought to yourself, neither can I? But it happened. You lived it. But most importantly, you survived it. We hear you, we see you, and we're here to talk about it. We're two moms, lifelong best friends, and we've both experienced traumatic, life-altering events involving our children. Welcome to episode 6 of I Can't Even Imagine. I'm Stephanie.
And I'm Victoria.
So Friday, the day after our photo shoot, was kind of interesting. My husband found out that some friends of ours were actually in town for the weekend, and this is a family who we became close to in our whole cancer journey. And they had posted something that they were coming to a local brewery that we like to hang out at, and they were doing like a fundraiser there for Childhood Cancer Awareness Month. So this brewery just so happens to be the one right next to us. That's like my husband's favorite hangout, and we're there like at least once a week. Mm-hmm. And it's a very, very sweet place. The owners are great. It's very, even though it's a brewery, it's very, family friendly. And so he's like, "Do you want to go?" And I'm like, "Of course I want to go. I would love to, to see our friends." And this is a family who lost their son. Mm-hmm. That was also a friend of. Both of the parents are friends of ours, and their son was a friend of our son's. So we came really close to them, and so we were excited to see them. So we get there, and there's not a whole lot of people there at the time, because what they were doing is, a couple of different brews that they had. They were donating a portion of, their sales to a foundation called Barbara's Friends, and Barbara's Friends is associated with our local hospital system here, and they help cancer families. And so we walk in, and like I said, there's not a lot of people there. And there's a couple of like picnic tables to our left, and there's like a couple of families and kids running around those tables, and they had a sign that said Barbara's Friends. And so we order our drinks, and Joe's like, "You want to go over there and say hi?" And I'm like, who? I don't recognize anybody. Mm-hmm. And he's like, "Well, it says Barbara's Friends, like go over there and say something." And I was like, it was kind of awkward. I'm like, "You go over there and say something." So he goes over, and he's like, "Hey," he's like, who's with Barbara's Friends?" And they point to this lady, and her name's Amy. She's a real cute blonde lady. And she gets up, and we talk to her, and I felt kind of weird at first, because I haven't had any communication with people in this world for a while. Mm-hmm. And she's like, Nurse Rachel and Nurse Katie are right over there. And I turn around, and they immediately, without hesitation, were like, "The Joneses! Hey, how's it going?" And I'm like, "Oh my gosh, what's happening right now?" And I recognized Katie right away. I actually didn't recognize Rachel, but now looking back at some of her older pictures, she had much shorter hair back then. Mm-hmm. These were my son's nurses. And they said that they recognized that, and Joe looks nothing like he did back then.
Right.
He's got long hair,
right? No more
full
goatees,
beard.
full beard.
Yeah, and when my son was in treatment, he even shaved his head. And I mean, he had the beard, but he didn't have like the mustache part attached, right? So he looks totally different. And I'm like, "How did you recognize us? He looks so different." And she's like, "I knew the moment I heard his voice."
Okay.
And I'm like, "Oh, really?" So they recognize us, and we start talking, and like the kids were kind of sitting away because they like brought their devices and stuff, and they're like playing on their tablets, and we're like, "Hey, come on over here." Do you remember Nurse Katie? Do you remember Nurse Rachel? Hey, as soon as he saw Katie, all of a sudden his whole facial structure, everything changed, his facial expression, and he recognized her immediately.
That's so cute.
And I was like, wow. I'm like, dude, it's been like 7 years or 5 years since, he's been there. And he was so young, but he remembers. And he said he didn't really remember Rachel. We also have to know, too, like they also wore like masks and, things on their head and stuff like that, too, sometimes. But then I'm having these thoughts in my head, like, is it awkward of me to just kind of have small chat and like walk away and just kind of ignore them? Would that be rude? Like, I don't know what's going to be too much information because we broke protocol, right? Remember?
Right.
Okay. So after he was done with treatment, this is when COVID things started happening. Things started changing really rapidly, and things started to get really weird. This was March of 2020. Mm-hmm. And we basically stopped going to all of our follow-up appointments, just to summarize it really simply. And technically we broke protocol. So I've always kind of had this battle in my mind of, do I want them to know how we're doing? Right. Do I want them a part of my life at all?
Right.
So they're both very sweet, both very friendly. So we have this little reunion. Everything's going great. You know, my son comes over, sees the nurses. We take some pictures. And then everybody kind of disperses for a little bit. I'm having this like internal battle in my mind of what is too much of me to say. Do I walk away? Is this awkward? And I was like, you know what? I'm just curious. So I finally get up the courage and I go to the table, and there was those two nurses, and they have a couple of friends with them. And I was like, hey, I'm just curious. I was like, how many cancer kids do you guys have right now? And she said, we have about 90 to 100. And I was like, really? That's interesting. And I was like, do you feel that the prevalence of cancer in children is changing? Do you feel like it's rising? You know, the diagnosis? And she goes, actually, we have the majority of our patients are tumors. She said, it never used to be that way. It used to be all leukemia patients. And she's like, now I have maybe 2 or 3. She said, we are seeing an insane influx of tumors. And I was like, thinking in my head, what's changed in the last 4 years to cause this, right? Of course, I didn't really say that, but my husband came over and said it. Interestingly, tumor patients are way, way up and leukemia has gone down. But she was also telling me how leukemia treatment is changing. And I got into telling her my story about how, you know, I advocated for tailoring my son's treatment plan. And she knew exactly what I was talking about. She remembered us having that sit down meeting with our oncologist, because she was basically like his assistant at that point. She was his like sidekick, right? I didn't remember her, but she knew everything about us. She remembered our meeting, and she commended me for taking that time to research and present the science to our oncologist, because she said, that's the only way that things are going to change for these kids. And I was like, whoa, hold on a second. I'm like, this is the person who I think is going to be against me. And the more we talk, I'm realizing she's on my side. And it like humanized her.
Right. How cool.
Right?
Yeah.
So it was really, really cool. So I, as we're talking, I started to feel really comfortable with her, because she was validating so many of the things that I was feeling.
Right.
And I also found out that she knows my sister. She told me a story about how like she met my sister, and my sister told her about my journey, and she was like, I'm taking care of your nephew. And I was like, oh, that was weird. And so we get into the whole story about, as I'm feeling more comfortable with her, I'm like, well, you know, we broke protocol. And after we finished treatment, and I found out she was the one I talked to that day. She was the one that the nurse that I was on the phone with when I was trying to cancel our appointment or postpone the appointment because things were getting really weird with COVID. And I was like, can we just go do our blood work at our family doctor and then, you know, have it faxed over? And she told me that it wasn't her. She wasn't the one that had a problem with that. She thought that was actually a great idea. But there was another person who I guess got fired eventually, because when we were supposed to have our appointment the next day, it was like some clerical position, like another secretary or something. That person was the one that canceled our appointment. And I was like, interesting.
So she canceled the appointment.
Because
Did
I was
they not
getting
want you to cancel the appointment?
what she kept telling me, well, that's our protocol. And I started to get frustrated. And I was like, listen, I'm like, I understand that that's the protocol of the hospital. I was like, but I can see on the news, I can see things that are happening. I've heard from other parents that are taking their child to the hospital for appointments that things are kind of strange right now. And there's a lot of unknowns, and, you know, there's masking, there's lining the hallways, and there's a lot of PTSD that's kind of tied to this situation for us. And I was like, I really don't want to take my kid down that road. We just finished treatment, right? And we're seeing like life is coming back to normal. And so I don't want to reopen that wound. And she was kind of giving me the runaround, and so I was fine. She's doing her job.
Yeah,
I get it. You know, she's just doing her job. And so I was like, okay, well, don't just forget about it. It's okay. I'm like, I'll just bring him in. We'll bring him in tomorrow, and I'll just have this face-to-face conversation with the oncologist, and maybe the next appointment we'll do my plan, right? Well, as I'm talking to her at the brewery, she was like, I was on your side.
Right.
She's like, I didn't think that there was any problem with that. She's like, absolutely. Like, you were in the right all along. And I was like, all this time in my head, I have been demonizing her.
Right.
Thinking that she was fighting me. And it wasn't even her that canceled the appointment. So I was like, wow, that was kind of an eye-opening experience. So I left, and I really felt like a weight was lifted off my shoulders. Part of me really wants to keep my son's health status private, especially from them. But at the same time, I want to show him off and be like, look, he is thriving.
Right.
You can see a light at the end of the tunnel. Yes, they can go through this hell and still turn out to be okay on the other side. Right?
Right.
So that was my Friday evening. I left out of there, and I only had 2 drinks, but I was pretty emotional.
Yeah, I bet.
Was not expecting to run into anybody that we knew, especially running into his nurses. And, I talked to them about, how I felt guilty that, Joe was the one to always bring him in and I wasn't. And they validated me on the fact that you were at home with the baby, you were breastfeeding full time. Like, they just really solidified all these, feelings that I had. And it was needed. Like, it was funny how it came to be because we had no plan of going there until that day. It was a very spontaneous decision.
Yeah.
But then I just felt like everything kind of lined up for a reason that's bigger than me. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
That's awesome.
that was my Friday.
Oh, well, I'm glad you had that experience.
Yeah.
It's clearly needed for you.
It's a lot, and I know it's kind of long-winded. So thank you, Amy, for Barbara's friends. Thank you to the nurses, Katie and Rachel. And thank you for really just taking the time to talk to me and validate my feelings on that whole situation. Today in the studio, we welcome Megan Dixon, mother of 2, owner of Rattled Concierge, a service that gives families more time together by taking care of their dishes, laundry, tidying up, and cleaning. This episode is being recorded in September, but will be released in early October. Important disclaimer: this episode will feature difficult or sensitive topics such as postpartum depression and suicidal thoughts and ideation. Well, welcome, Megan. Thank you for joining us today.
Good morning. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So I know that you have quite a story to share with us. I'm going to go ahead and pass that over to you and tell us what brought you here, my dear.
Awesome. Yes, happy to share. So I'm going to talk about my experience with postpartum depression. When I was growing up, I was not one of those people that always wanted to be a mom, right? Like I was always a nurturing person, a caring person, but I wasn't always one of those people that's like, I can't wait to be a mom. I can't wait to do this. I just never was important to me. So married my husband. At that time, we weren't sure whether or not we wanted kids. It was like a 50-50. Like, do we want kids or not? We don't know. We'll decide later on. Then we make the decision that we're ready to have a child and we're excited about it, right? Like, this is cool. Like, it was a definite decision. Like, it wasn't like, oh, let's just leave it to chance or just if it happens. Like, it was a decision. We are going to change our lives forever in having a child and having a family. And it was a big decision for me especially because I knew that it would be a bigger sacrifice for me in that I was going to start to be a stay-at-home mom, and I was going to leave my career. In my past, I had been in education for 10 years, and I was an assistant principal, and then I moved on from that, and I was in private aviation. Absolutely loved my job, loved my career, but biological clock, and unfortunately, I was getting older and older, and it can be harder and harder to conceive. So we made the decision that it was going to be kind of then or never to try to have a child. So, but it was going to be a big decision, it was going to be a big sacrifice because my husband's career is that he works on a ship. He's a captain of a ship, and he's away for 3 weeks, then home for 3 weeks, away for 3 weeks, home for 3 weeks, forever.
Right.
So when he's gone, I'm the main caretaker. And because of that, it just made sense for me to be the one that was home with the child, especially, of course we could do daycare and me working, but then instead of having one person or two people that could be home with the child when they're sick from daycare, it's only one, and it's a whole thing, right? Plus the cost of daycare alone.
Oh yeah, it's like nowadays it's like a whole nother mortgage.
A whole nother mortgage, and you're just like, is this worth it? So we decided that I'd be a stay-at-home mom, and that was a very difficult decision. I loved working. I still do. Loved working. I loved making money. I loved being around people. I'm a people person. Love being around people.
Can totally relate to that.
Yeah, exactly. So it was a big decision. So once we decided that we wanted to have children, we really did our research. We read books. We did all we could to make sure we were going to be the best parents possible. I really think that we did everything we could. We would talk on the couch and talk about how we were going to raise the child, what we believed in, what we didn't believe in, what we wanted to do differently than our parents, all these things. Got pregnant, and everything was wonderful. I had a great pregnancy. No issues. Was very healthy. Everything was great. In fact, I did CrossFit up until my due date, which was August 28th. Yeah, at a reduced rate, of course. But I'm saying that because I was able to exercise, and sometimes, without wanting to, you get put on bed rest and things like that. And I feel very fortunate that I was able to exercise up until the last day. I was still walking around, and it was wonderful. So my due date was August 28th, 2021. And the next day, August 29th, I started to get labor pain, contractions. So they started in the evening around, 6 o'clock at night, something like that. They started at 7 minutes, every 7 minutes, and then they shortened to be every 5 minutes, and then they shortened to be every 2 minutes. So my husband's tracking all these times, right? Oh my gosh, we're at 2 minutes. This is great. We're getting all of our things together. We're packing up the car. Like, this is happening. This is awesome. So we wait until around probably 11 o'clock or midnight when they're, really consistently every 2 minutes. And he drives us to the hospital. And we get there, and they put me on the bed. They see if I'm dilated. I'm not dilated. Not a problem. But they said, unfortunately, because it's COVID times, we don't have enough hospital beds. And so you're going to go home and labor at home until you're dilated. No problem at all. So we drive back home. I'm still in labor, having contractions every 2 minutes. And so we go through they continue all night and all morning and all the next day. They would go between 2 minutes to 3 minutes, 2 minutes to 3 minutes. So this whole time, of course, I'm, on my hands and knees on the floor in labor. And we're just anticipating that, I'm sure I'm going to dilate soon. I'm sure this is going to be it. Probably tonight I'll have the baby. So things ramp back up, and they're getting, at night it would get down to like every minute that I was having these contractions. So we get to the hospital. They're like, yep, you're for sure contracting, but you are for sure not dilated. So they send me back home. So at this point, this is by day 3, it was starting to be taxing on my body, because anyone that's had a child knows that when you are in labor, you are not eating. You're certainly not sleeping. I'd have drinks of water here and there, but you are not able to really do anything. And if you are doing things, then you're not in true labor, right?
Right.
So I'm just on the ground in pain.
Are these like take your breath away? Like you can't speak through them?
Absolutely.
Like full on active labor.
Full on active labor. So it was crazy to me that I'm like, how am I not dilated? How is this happening? It was, I could not speak, it was labor. I wasn't walking around the house, wasn't sitting, I was in labor. Now, what we realized since then is that my body has an interesting reaction to pain where I faint, I pass out when I'm in extreme pain. And it happened before a couple of years ago when I got stung by a jellyfish. When I was wakeboarding, I actually passed out in the water, like after being stung. We thought it was weird, chalked it up to whatever. And now during this time, we realized, oh, it's my body's reaction to pain. So he would find me, like I would, in between contractions, I'd be using the restroom, and he'd find me on the tile floor, had passed out because of the pain, right? So that was scary for my husband. And so this whole time, he is calling the OBGYN. He's in contact with my mom. He's he's like, something seems off here, right? Like my wife is clearly in labor, not eating. We were concerned, of course, about the baby, right? Not getting any nutrition. I'm not getting really the water that I need, hydration, all these things. Like, this can't be good for the baby.
Water broken by that point?
Water had not broken. No,
Okay.
Nothing else had happened. Yeah. So by day 3, he calls my mom and says, I need you to come down here. I need help. I'm nervous. I need help. By day 4, I was starting to, unfortunately, show signs that I was thinking about suicide. And I remember Googling on my phone, is there a way to, end my life without harming the baby? Because I was in such pain and I didn't see a light at the end of the tunnel, right? It felt like no one's helping me. No one's telling me that this is, it just felt like there was no end in sight for me. And I think probably most moms feel like that when you're in labor. You're just like, when is this going to end?
Yeah.
But after 4 days of it and not eating, and you can imagine how weak your body is after 4 days of not eating, right? It's like...
Or sleeping.
Yeah, or
sleeping.
sleeping.
Hydration.
Right.
Yeah, my goodness.
I mean, not sleep, that's a torture method.
I was going to say, this is like sleep deprivation torture.
Yes, I can say that it's torturous to, be up with a newborn all night, and that is terrible. But at least you're getting half an hour stretches of sleeping or this or that.
And that's normal. That's like part of the early days of motherhood. Yeah.
Right. And you're taking care of this thing and whatever. When you're in labor every 2 minutes, you are not even catching 30 seconds of sleep. You know what I mean? Like, there's no sleep. So my mom comes down, and at this point they're on suicide watch for me. My mom would sit with me for 12 hours. My husband would sit with me for 12 hours, and then they would take turns sleeping to make sure that somebody was really around me at all times.
Did you convey to your husband that you were having those thoughts, or did they catch you looking up things? Like, how did they know?
Not. I didn't. I definitely did not tell anybody that I had to Google it on my phone. Mm-hmm. And I was nervous that Big Brother was I was like, is somebody going to come to my house right now? But that's how desperate I was, right?
Yeah.
I'm just like, I want to die in this moment, which is crazy to think about now. And, but they knew that I was not feeling well. In fact, at one point, my husband was in contact with the OBGYN at the entire time. But the answers were kind of like, well, this is what it's like to have a baby. I don't know what you expect. Like, you're the one that got pregnant. This is labor. I don't know what you want. I don't know what you expect. Yeah. And to me, that was my first child. Maybe that is what happens to people. I don't know, right? And especially my husband didn't know. He'd never been around somebody that was pregnant and in labor, and certainly didn't know what to do or how to advocate for me. But all he knew was that he saw his wife in pain, and something wasn't right. Mm-hmm. So at one point, when he called the OBGYN, and he said, my wife hasn't slept for 4 days. I'm very concerned about her health, the baby's health. This cannot be good. And the OBGYN suggested Ambien.
Oh, my God.
And I'll never forget, I was obviously very out of it. I was in active labor. But I turned and looked to my husband, and I said, I know that I'm not in a good state right now, but putting somebody on Ambien who is... I've never had a sleeping pill before. I mean, who knows what I would do if I went on Ambien, especially when I was in a state of being suicidal, right?
Yeah, and all the Ambien stuff that comes out and saying that women can't take as much as men. And
right.
It didn't happen until after all of the crazy things that women were doing.
Yes, horror stories.
Yeah.
People getting in cars, people doing things to their body, just weird things. People do strange things on sleeping pills. So I said, absolutely not. I will not be taking Ambien when I am in a state like this.
Not only that, but if you did take the Ambien, now you're passed out sleeping. What if you're sleeping through the labor because it hits you so hard? You're a small person too. And then something happens to the baby.
Of course. And who knows how that would affect
Correct.
a baby that was at 41 weeks, 41 weeks at this point. So it was very upsetting to hear that was really the only suggestion, truly the only suggestion that they had.
I'm reading here, Ambien is linked to suicide and worse, depression, if you already have depression.
And it's crazy that I knew that in that moment.
Right.
Even as distraught as I was like, that's not happening. That is not happening. So that was day 4. The nighttime rolls around. Of course, I'm having we went back to the hospital. Almost every night he would take me and say, please take her, please take her, please take her. Nope, cannot take her. She's not dilated. That was the answer. Finally, on night 5, I was immobile, obviously. I was not walking. He would carry me, or my mom would carry me from the couch to the bathroom. I was not mobile. And for some reason, he must have said, we're going to the hospital, and this is going to be that. I don't know whether he just knew in his heart, like, we're not leaving after this or what, but he put me in the back of our Jeep Grand Cherokee because I was not able to, anybody that's in labor knows that sitting with a seatbelt on when you're in labor is not...
Sitting. I
sitting
couldn't
in
do
general.
it. I just couldn't.
You can't do
people
it.
like the birth ball, I hate it. I cannot sit like that. It hurts so bad.
Yeah, there's certain positions that are just... you're uncomfortable in general, but certain positions you're like, this is not happening.
I would either have the seat laid back or I would be like hugging the back of the seat, hands and knees.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Or in like fetal position, just something. But yeah, sitting with a seatbelt, like the drive to the hospital, you're just like, get me out of here. So he literally put me in the trunk of our car. And I remember rolling around in the back and he's in the front seat driving. And the whole time, Megan, make a sound so I know you're alive. Megan, please, Megan. My husband was so distraught by this point, right? He just wants to help his wife. And he's feeling that he's not getting help from anyone. Megan, just make a sound. Megan, make a squeak noise. Megan, just moan so I can hear you. So we get to the hospital. We pull up. They come out with a wheelchair for me. And they say, hi, what's your name? He says, this is Megan. She's on day 5 of labor. They said, well, that's not possible. That you can't be in labor for 5 days. That's not possible. Which I've been told many, many times. Even afterwards, people will tell me that's not possible. And I'm like, I know it sounds crazy, and I know it sounds like I'm being over-exaggerating. Pregnant women can be like, oh, it's terrible, blah, blah, blah. No, I'm telling you right now, I was in labor. So she's standing there and she says, well, why can't she say her name? And my husband says, she has not been able to speak for the past 3 or 4 days. I don't know if you've been here the past couple nights, but I've been here the past couple, you must not have been on shift, but we've been doing this the past 4 nights. And she's still in labor. And so they're tapping me and they're saying, what is your name? Tell us your name. And I'm looking at her with a blank face like, I cannot tell you my name. I cannot speak. I have not been able to speak for a couple days now. I'm trying to tell her all this with my eyes. And they're tapping me saying, what's wrong with you? Are you mute? What she can't talk? And my husband he's saying, this has been her. Like, that she cannot talk. I've been concerned. I've been calling. No one's giving me answers. So they said, well, park the car. So they park the car. They wheel me in and my husband comes in and they say, something's wrong with her. Something's wrong here. Did you know that your wife is in such a state? Something's wrong here. And he's like, I know that. This is exactly.
I've only been here every day.
I've only been here every single day. I'm looking for help. And they're like, something's weird here. I think they were concerned that it might be like an abuse situation or some sort of strange situation.
I understand that, but my God, my blood is boiling for you guys right now. I'm so angry.
Yeah, it was. And imagine me. I'm not even able to speak. And so I'm trying to speak to them with my eyes and communicate. And I just want to scream like, no, he's the most loving, wonderful husband in the world. He's just trying to advocate for me, but he doesn't know how. So I'll never forget the way that they dumped me out of the wheelchair. And they said, get on the bed. And I looked at her and I shook my head like, I'm not able to get on the bed. I'm not able to move myself, right? And I'm sure she kind of thought like, okay, here's a pregnant lady who can't move herself, right? Oh, no, I really couldn't move myself. So they dumped me out of the wheelchair. I fall onto the ground.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. And I'll never forget it because what was going through my mind was I was thinking, here I am, somebody who is normally a very with it person, right? I'm able to speak English. I'm able to, and I thought to myself, I wonder if this is how somebody is treated that may not have the IQ level that I have, or
there's no language barrier.
the language
or your hearing
barrier. Exactly.
I have people that work for me that are deaf, and they've got horror stories from the hospital.
Totally. And that's all I could think of in that moment. I'll never forget. I thought, if I'm being treated like this and my husband's standing there, I can't even imagine somebody who may have another situation like that would be treated like that and are not able to advocate for themselves, right? It was terrible. It was absolutely terrible. I will say that was the only bad moment with the staff there. From then on, everything was wonderful. But the intake was a terrible, terrible process. They checked my dilation levels, and of course, I'm not dilated still. But for some reason, I don't know if they finally believed me about the mental state, but they admitted me. I had not been planning on an epidural. I was of course wanting to go natural if I felt like I could, but was open to an epidural. I know things happen, and and sometimes your birth plan doesn't go the way that you planned. By that time, I was ready for an epidural.
I don't blame you.
Gave me an epidural, and the good thing about that was I was able to sleep for the first time in 5 days. So I slept for hours and hours and hours, and I ate. So I ate a popsicle, Jell-O, whatever they had there. Everything from there on went very smoothly, actually. I went into labor on my own, and everything went well with my son coming out and arriving, and everything was good in the hospital.
I was going to say, I bet that your body, your fight or flight started to take hold and held your labor. You're feeling the labor, but nothing's going on because your body is like, hey, we can't let this baby out. We're in immediate danger.
Yes. And I had never heard the term fight or flight, really.
Right.
And then I heard it afterwards from my chiropractor. And that's totally what it was.
Or freeze, or there's freeze and fawn. There's a few more now that they've added, which all make complete sense.
There's a book called, I believe it's by Grantley Dick Reed.
Yep.
That we had to read, or we were familiar with when we went through doula training.
Yep.
Oh, wow.
It's all about childbirth when fear is involved, and how they use an example of when a cat is in labor, but the cat senses that it's in danger, it's gonna go and find a hole or find
labor stops until
labor.
It's safe.
It will stop until they find a safe place, and that's just primitive. You really think about it. That is ingrained, not just in animals. It's in us too.
Right.
If we find that we're in fear, our body's going to go, sorry, not today.
Closing up.
Yep, closing up shop.
Yeah.
Wow. I totally believe it. Yeah, after hearing that afterwards, I'm like, that's totally what my body was doing. Don't know why, but it was. But yeah, luckily everything went well with labor, delivery. Everything was great. The nurses were all wonderful. Things went well. Everything was great at the hospital. We leave the hospital. We're in just, we're so happy to have our healthy child. Everything was wonderful. We get home, and we were those new parents that were like, this is great. Like, the baby's sleeping. We put him down. Of course, he's sleepy when we first bring him home. The car ride was great. He slept the whole ride home.
That oxytocin was flowing, right?
Oxytocin was flowing. It was great. And he was a sleepy newborn, right? Which is what everybody says that'll happen. I'll never forget, I put him in the carrier, and I was vacuuming in the carrier because, try to get him used to the sound and all those things that they tell you to do in the beginning to make it so that they're not waking up every couple minutes if they hear the vacuum, if they hear the doorbell. And I think I actually said to my husband, this is a breeze, right? Mm-hmm. This is, why would anybody say that this is difficult? This is a breeze.
After you had just gone through 5 days of labor and this terrible triage incident, you're like, this is so easy.
That was nothing compared to that, right?
That's how you know you're high on hormones.
Literally high on hormones. Yeah. Literally. And also, I think in my mind, I was like, I got the hard part over with, right?
Yeah. It can only get better from here.
It can only get better from here. People say that you don't get sleep, but I've done that before, right? I've done that in college. I've pulled all-nighters. What
you just did a 5-day stint.
Just a 5-day stint, exactly. No big deal, right? Something is easy. The baby's sleepy, not a big deal. Day 2, day 3. By day 3, probably by day 2, actually, he was not sleeping at all. Not for naps, not for nighttime. He would go 24 hours, 48 hours, not sleeping. Which I know newborns, newborns don't sleep a lot, right? They'll not sleep during the night. They'll wake up every couple hours. But not sleeping for like a full 24-hour period or 48-hour period is pretty weird. And if anything will send you into postpartum depression, I think it's that, right? Unfortunately, it was the second or third day when I started to have those bad feelings. And I started to have feelings of, it started as, my baby won't sleep. Why won't my baby sleep? No one warned me that the baby wouldn't sleep. Everybody says that newborns are so sleepy. They sleep for 12 to 16 hours. They're going to be so sleepy. You're going to have to wake them up to breastfeed. It's going to be crazy how sleepy they are. So in my mind, I'm thinking, my baby's not doing what everybody told me that it would and what the book said would happen. So that must mean something's wrong with my baby and something's wrong with me, right? Mm-hmm. And when the pattern continues and you're trying to shush this baby and you're trying to do this and you're trying to take them outside and do then it started to really get in my head, right? And I'm like, I am not a good mom. I must not be a good mom. I was not meant to do this. This makes sense that I didn't want to be a mom my whole life because I actually wasn't meant to do this. I wasn't meant to be a mom. This is not what I was meant to do. So then I started to have, I started to really get the bad thoughts. And any mom really or caretaker of a baby at night knows that as the sun starts to go down, you get that dreading feeling, right?
Right.
Of, I'm going to be up. This baby's going to be up all night, and I'm alone. And even if you have a partner and your partner's coming in and checking on you, or if you're bottle feeding or whatever, still you're really up all night, right? You're not getting that break that you used to of rest for 6-8 hours, however long you slept before that. You're never getting that rest. And you start to realize this is why it's so hard, because now the sun is up and I have to do this all day and all over again. And I don't see an end in sight, right? There's no end in sight. Now, my husband is the most supportive, most wonderful. He was in with me all night, checking on me. What can I do? But I was more of, you get some sleep. That way you're able to, ideally tomorrow, take the baby while I nap or whatever it was.
Now, did he have any time off from work?
He did. So the great thing about his job is that he can really take off as much time as he wants. He just doesn't get paid for it.
Gotcha.
So we saved up a lot of money before that, knowing that he could kind of take this time. And I think he had either 6 or 9 weeks off, which is amazing. Mm-hmm. I mean, really very unheard of. Again, he was not paid for it. They don't have anything such as PTO in their industry. Either you're on the boat working and you're getting paid, or you're home. That's how it works. And so he was home. He was supportive. He was doing all the things to help, right? In the middle of the night, he was waking up. He was helping. But when you're breastfeeding, it's hard because there's really not a lot. I wasn't going to have him sit there just to watch me breastfeed. It's like, you go sleep. I'm not going to torture you too.
Sitting there with their useless nipples.
That's right.
Right. So useless. So useless.
So useless.
And he would say that. He's like, I wish I could help you. I wish I could. I'm like, it's okay. This is part of being a woman, part of being a mom, right? So this is day 3, 4, and I start to realize like I'm having some bad thoughts and I'm starting to spiral, right? Mm-hmm. And by the end of a week and a half or 2 weeks, I was starting to have the feeling of, I don't want to hurt my baby, but I am not good enough for this baby. And so it will be best if I am not on this earth, because then somebody else could take care of him. My husband will do a great job taking care of him. It will be best if I'm not here, because clearly I'm not a good enough mom if I can't even get my child to sleep, right? Wow. Taking care of your baby seems like the most basic instinct, right? Animals do it. Women have been doing it for how long?
Right.
And so when you feel like you can't, or feel like you're not being successful, you feel like a total loser. Mm-hmm. Like a total loser. Who cannot take care of their own child? Who cannot settle their own child? As the mom and this nurturing being, just being in my arms should settle my child. Now, I know that's not the case. That's just how newborns are sometimes. But when you're in that moment and the hormones are pumping and everything, you're like, I'm actually a failure. But I knew in my mind, I remembered reading that the crib is always a safe place. You can put your baby down and you can always walk away. And so in my mind, I thought, I'm going to put the baby in the crib. I'm going to walk out the front door, and I'm just going to start a new life. I'm going to start walking. And really, I would play this in my head night after night. Tonight's the night that I'm going to do it. I'm just going to put the baby down. I don't know if I'll take my phone or not. Probably not. I'm not going to take my phone because then somebody could track me. I'm just going to leave my phone here. And then I'm going to walk out the door. And then I'm just going to start walking up Collier Boulevard and just keep walking. And I'll just start a new life. It'll be no big deal, right? Like, it'll be no big deal. No one will be able to find me. These are all the thoughts that I think back, and I'm like, how did I think that was going to work, right?
Right.
But truly, in your mind, you're just, it seems like it would work. So we're going day to day. Now, mind you, I'm also having a really hard time breastfeeding, which is a whole other animal.
Right.
No one tells you that you might have trouble breastfeeding, that there might be pain. And again, you think it's one of the most basic human and animal things, right? It's how moms feed their babies. Why would anybody have trouble with this? If I'm having trouble with this, then I'm probably not meant to be a mom. I was not meant to do this. And everything that I would read online would say, it lasts for 2 weeks and then it'll get better.
Yeah, you have to they say you have to get over the hump.
Get over the hump, right? And
Mine
I'm like,
was
that makes
6 week
sense.
hump, by the way. I was cracked. I was bleeding. When I would pump, my milk would be red. Mm-hmm. It was so bad.
That sounds terrible.
But I was so determined. I didn't know anything about lip ties and tongue ties at the time. And even now, everybody was reversing them for like so fast to reverse them. And now they're holding out because it's, or something. I don't know. But my kids all had latch issues. And obviously I'm the common denominator. It's something about my nip or something. I know
that's
exactly
the problem
what you feel
though,
like.
is when, and especially I'm sure once you had baby 2, 3, then you're thinking, it's me.
It's clearly me, right?
It's
I'm the common
clearly me.
denominator. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm the only common denominator here. So then when that's in your head, you're like, wait a second. And then when you're reading everything online and it's saying 2 weeks, that's it. It's just 2 weeks. It's easy. It's not that. You're like, this is not easy. This does not feel natural. It did not feel natural to me. And of course, everything also online is saying, breastfeeding is such a beautiful bond with your baby. It's a bonding time. It's a beautiful bonding time. It helps with the hormones. It helps with postpartum depression. And I'm sitting there with my son thinking, this is not bonding. This is terrible, right? And I'm similar to you. I remember mine was the 5-week mark when it started to be less painful to shower. Do you remember you don't face the shower head because it's that painful? I mean, bad, right? And I'm sure you were like this too. I would wince whenever my husband would bring him to me, like he's hungry, and you're just, you have a physical reaction. You couldn't help it. Your body's like, that's painful. Why would I want that, right? Why would I want to be near that thing?
Would curl and tears would stream down my face when they would latch, because you're just ripping open these wounds.
Yes.
And then the aversion would really start as they were getting older. I would go through these small little phases of I just want you off of my body. And I felt like a monster.
Yes.
But then I realized there's other people that say the same thing. And this nursing aversion can be normal. So you just don't feel so bad. But the early stages when it's painful, it's the worst.
And no one is telling you that.
I went to a lactation consultant with my first, and I was really poor, and I had WIC. And I went to the WIC office to this lactation consultant, and we're in this lobby. And she's like, okay, let's see him latch. In a lobby. You want me to take out my 23-year-old boob? I don't show anybody.
No.
And I'm like, what? No. I'm like, do you have an office?
Right.
Or something? And even then I'm uncomfortable showing you
it's a stranger.
my boob. Right.
It's a complete stranger.
I was I couldn't get any help. I didn't know. I was so...
So that was a wash. You didn't get any help from her.
No, I didn't get any help from her. And I was so poor. And I didn't have... Facebook groups weren't a thing.
No.
None of my friends had kids. I was the only one. I had no support.
No support.
So
and then a few years later,
5
she
months.
probably would have been like, here's my boob.
Well, that's the thing. You get used
Kid
to it.
4, everybody saw my
Yes,
boob.
you get used to it. Yeah, you're doing it outside. You're doing it in the car, at the steering wheel.
I go to the big latch on events where there's lots of women in a big group photo, all
Titties
nursing
everywhere.
at the same time.
Yes.
Yeah, titties everywhere.
It's beautiful and it's lovely. Yeah, but in the beginning when you're
a first time mom. In the beginning, even I had issues with my first. He had I had to get what are those things that cover your nipple?
The shields.
The shields. I had to wear shields with him, and then because mine are short and almost flat. So he had like nothing to grasp onto. I knew nothing about tongue ties, nothing about lip ties. And then my second, thank goodness, a really good friend of mine's a lactation consultant, and she would make house calls to me like at like midnight. And I remember distinctly one day I actually had a fever because my hormones were I was right after she was born and my hormones were still fluctuating. I was waking up in just puddles and puddles of sweat. And I was battling a fever, and I couldn't get her to latch, and because every time she would latch, it was like she said, tears. My nipples were cracked; they were bleeding. I would instantly just start like bawling. And thank goodness I had this woman because she was a genius, and she fixed it. But I'll never forget that pain.
Yes.
Good gracious, that hurts.
Yes,
It
it's terrible.
The fourth kid, I realized they were doing such a shallow latch, and I don't have big. I guess that's your nipple, the part that pops out. They don't stick out. My two are
That's
a
what I
little
was
more
saying
on the
about
flatter
me.
side. So
Yeah.
there's not a lot to latch onto.
Right.
But my areolas are bigger than their tiny little baby mouth, right?
Right.
So they're like the lady or YouTube, thank God, she said the hamburger, because I'm big chested too. So squeeze it like a hamburger, good and get the head in.
Yeah.
And you have to like manhandle your child
helpful.
to like
And
throw them on
this
there.
is kid 4. Still had about 3 weeks of ripped and chapped and bleeding, but after that, I was like,
Yeah, once you get it
Right.
figured
Once
out.
you get it figured out, you're like,
comes-
okay, I
yeah.
can see why this,
right.
why
and then
people
it
do
gets to
this.
a point where you're laying in bed with them and they just latch themselves
big
on. You're still
deal.
sleeping.
Right.
You don't even have to
Right.
manipulate them or any that. Yeah.
Yeah, I was really determined too. It's like my first, I really wanted to breastfeed, but we had so many issues in the hospital right off the bat that we ended up supplementing. In addition, I was breastfeeding also, but it wasn't, I really wanted to exclusively breastfeed. I had that like determination. So with my second, when I had that issue with that pain, I was like, I was spiraling in my head. What if I can't breastfeed her? What if I'm determined and then it's not enough, and
Yes, all the
I
thoughts
can't, all my
start-
goals are gone. Like, I don't want to put her on this formula.
You start spiraling.
You start spiraling.
Thinking of everything, all the plans that you had.
Yeah. Actually, thank goodness, I ended up nursing her for 3.5 years.
Wow. So it
With the other way,
worked
with the other direction eventually, but yeah, I became a huge advocate for breastfeeding. But
Yes.
a lot of people don't tell you in the beginning. You really have to.
It's really, really
You just
difficult.
assume it's a
tough.
basic human
You assume it's a basic
instinct,
human
right?
instinct,
The
just like
baby's
an
gonna
animal.
latch on. It's no big deal.
It
Animals
is
do
a
it.
basic human instinct.
Right.
Your body is making milk for your baby. You
Right.
create your baby, you birth your baby through your body, and then you
Right.
feed your baby with your body.
Exactly.
Fact is fact.
Well,
that should
especially-
be it, right?
Yeah,
It
But
should
it's
be that
so
simple.
not.
It should be that simple. It's
so
so
not.
not.
Especially when you've had an easy pregnancy,
Yes.
and then you have an easy labor and delivery. You're like, oh, everything's gone so perfect, and then you run into this, and you're like, oh shit.
Yes. 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 It can be, it's a whole other journey. And I will say that I did get a lactation consultant because it was covered under insurance, which is great.
good.
I got like 3 visits. We said, let's just try it. 3 visits. She was wonderful. Her name is Juana, and she is the reason why I stuck with it. If I had not had
Yeah.
her help, I would not have stuck with it. There's no way. I was so frustrated.
We love you, lactation consultants. If any of you are listening,
Seriously, they're
we
angels.
love you.
It really, because the and I had tried to educate myself. I took the hospital class, but having somebody there to, like you said, show you, to put them on, to show you, nope, this is exactly how you want their lips. This is that. That's everything. And yeah, it's weird to show a stranger that at first, and then after the first time you're like, come on in, see how it's working, see how it's not working. I don't even care, right? Like,
They're all made in all shapes and sizes.
exactly.
and,
But I can
you
see
know,
in an office in a lobby,
in the lobby
that
of a
Yeah.
Medicaid WIC
I would have
office.
been mortified. I'm mortified. I wouldn't have done it.
No, I was
wouldn't
20
have done.
no, I was
I would have
24.
had tears
I
streaming
was
down my
24
face.
years old.
Yeah, especially when you're young.
Yeah.
There's no way.
I wasn't that teenager, even though I had nice tatas. I wasn't that person that showed them all over the place.
No.
So just wasn't me.
Yeah.
You mean you had some self-respect?
Right. What? That's crazy. Oh my gosh. So at this point, I'm still feeling very overwhelmed, but I'm not really expressing it because I was very ashamed and embarrassed to share any feelings, definitely with friends or family, but even with my husband, because he had seen me as this go-getter, as this independent woman. I could handle everything whenever he was away for work. I, was an assistant principal of a school. I did all these things and managed all sorts of things. How am I going to tell him that I can hardly manage taking care of our child, right?
Right. It's like 7-pound baby.
Seriously. Yeah.
Right.
Like, that's ridiculous. At this point, I was taking care of my son because I knew it was the right thing to do, but I did not have a bond with him at all. There was no bond. I felt nothing when I saw him, when I looked at him, when I changed his diaper. I can remember looking down at him and just feeling numb, It was like I was looking at a stranger. Well, even a stranger I would smile at. Really, I was just like a shell of a human, right? And I just remember thinking, and I would talk to him though. I would talk to him and tell him everything that I was feeling. And I would just say, Ryan, I'm having a hard time right now. Mommy's having a really hard time, but I'm going to get better, and this is going to get better. Like, I'm trying to talk out loud and just, because I knew you're supposed to, like, talk to your babies. They can hear your voice. But really, I was just telling him all these difficult things that I was feeling. And, I was just verbalize, and I would say, Mommy's having a hard time. Mommy doesn't want to pick you up. Mommy doesn't this. But I was hopeful that one day I would be able to do that, and I would want to do it, right? Like, in my head, I'm just like, I am taking care of you because I know it's the right thing to do and it's what mom should do, but I don't want to do this at all right now. I remember calling my mom and saying, I hate being a mom. I hate being a mom. Why did anyone tell me this was a good idea? I hate being a mom. Why did anybody tell me that I'd be a good mom? I'm a terrible mom. And of course, the people who I would vent to would say, no, you're doing great, Meg, you're doing great. But it didn't feel great, right? Like, when you're looking back, I think that, who knows whether colic is even a thing, I don't even know what that is. Maybe it was just baby fussiness. But looking back, he was very tricky in the fact that, number one, he was not a good sleeper, but he also screamed every time he was in the car seat and screamed every time he was in a stroller. So he was a tricky baby in that way, because even going for car rides, screaming the entire time, he would be purple by the time we got to wherever we were going. And I wasn't going on joy rides. This was just taking him to Publix to get food, taking him so that I could take a walk at the parks, because I was trying to work on my mental health. But by the time we got somewhere, I was a wreck, because anybody that knows a screaming child in a car, especially a newborn in a car, it makes you want to drive off the road.
It's just another level of stress.
It's another level of stress. When toddlers are screaming or crying or whatever, I'm not saying it's not stressful, but when your helpless newborn is crying and you can't even get back there, yeah.
You're driving alone.
You're driving
alone. You
can't
reach back.
And even if you could, what are you going to do, right? It's not like a toddler when you can hand them a snack and they'll be happy.
Give them the iPad for 2 seconds.
Right.
So just be quiet.
Exactly.
Let me just drive.
Or even a pacifier. You can't even finagle putting a pacifier.
Because they can't keep it in their little lips.
They can't keep it in their lips.
Oh, man. That just brings back, like, flashbacks.
Right? Like PTSD.
Oh, my gosh. I remember one time when my son was, like, 2 or 3 months old, and we had to drive to a baby shower, like, on, like, Captiva. And it was, like, an hour drive, and he screamed, and I didn't, my kids actually were fine on majority of car rides, unless, like, I don't know, they were uncomfortable or something was wrong, but it wasn't like a constant, like, they always cried in the car. But this particular trip, he screamed the entire way there, and I was driving by myself, and I had to, like, stop the car a couple of times, and I'm like, then I was just like, let's just get there, just be determined to, let's just get there. As soon as we get there, I can take him out, everything's gonna be fine, I'll give him a boob, he'll be happy. Oh my gosh. But, like, thinking about other moms that had to deal with that every time they drive anywhere, like, I was like shaking by the time I got there. I was like, my nerves were a wreck.
And it's like, you're not even, like, frustrated with your child, you're frustrated with the situation. And to me, it was very much like, again, it exacerbated my condition, because then I'm thinking, well, breastfeeding's not going well. My child never sleeps. And now my child hates the car seat and the stroller.
Which are supposed to calm them.
Which is supposed to, you have all these people saying, really? They hate the stroller? Or they hate the car seat? That's how I put my kid to sleep.
Yeah, we drive around the neighborhood.
Right, we drive around the neighborhood.
And now you're like, now I'm trapped at home. I can't even go anywhere.
Trapped at home. Meanwhile, what do they say? Get out, do things with the baby, go see friends, do this, do that. And I'm such a social person. It's killing me, right?
You're going stir crazy.
literally going stir crazy.
All of this that you're describing since the beginning of your first day of labor is like such a recipe
It
for
is. It's a
everything
storm.
you're getting to.
That's right.
Yep.
That's right.
It is such a recipe for disaster for you.
Yeah, and then later on when I had talked to the chiropractor about this, which he is also an angel, he said, don't you think that a 5-day labor would have an effect on that baby?
Yeah.
Like, it's no wonder that my son was so... He had that cortisol in his body. Think about how much he had pumped up in him. You know, so once I found out this thing, I'm like, no wonder, because when you think, yeah, right, it's a recipe for disaster, all those things. Now, I want to make it very clear. I had all the help in the world, all the help and support. My family, my husband's family, friends, everybody was knocking down the door. How can I help you? How can I this? How can I that? But it was also very difficult because when you're in that state, I didn't know what to ask for. My son didn't want to be held by anybody but me. When you're in those beginning stages and you're cluster feeding, they're feeding every half an hour, 45 minutes. By the time you get finished feeding, you go use the bathroom and then they're ready to feed again, right? So this whole thing of sleep when the baby sleeps, do this, do that,
I hate that advice.
The worst.
People in the universe, stop telling mothers
Stop
this.
saying that.
Stop it.
It's literally toxic because I had that in my mind too, that I was going to do that. Oh, I'll just sleep when the baby sleeps. Of course, I'll put my child down and then I'll take, even if it's a 20-minute nap, right? And then when you don't get that, you're like, well, other moms are sleeping while their baby's sleeping, right?
We're getting a tight 8 hours. This is just broken up.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. And you're like, and then you just feel like more of a super loser, right? And then your picture, and that's the other thing, is then you're going on the internet and you're going on social media and you're seeing all these other moms. And I don't doubt that other people have other experiences. And I'm very happy for them, truly, because I have friends that have had those experiences. Meg, I had to wake up my baby every time to feed him. And they're not saying it to be, to push it in my face. They're truly saying, like, I had an opposite problem, right? Really, I was able to feed my newborn. I was able to put them down. And then I was able to do this. I've watched them do it. They're not lying. But I think most moms would say I've
never had that experience.
No.
Never.
But those are the ones that you're reading about on social media. So then again, you're getting it in your head.
They're the ones that are saying something. The people who are struggling are so much more like
ashamed and reserved.
Yeah, they don't want to say anything.
Of course not, because you feel like you're broken.
Right.
You feel like your baby's broken and you feel like you're broken. And also you don't want to admit it because especially if you are type A personality like so many of us women are, you feel like you're not succeeding. So why am I going to put out on social media that I'm not succeeding right now, right? Like, I'm not going to do that, especially when social media is such a highlight reel of all the good things. Nothing good was going on there, right? Mm-hmm. Nothing good.
And you're not going to be splattering that all over the internet.
I'm not doing that. Exactly.
No.
Exactly.
No, it's embarrassing.
Which I eventually did, by the way.
Good.
At the end of those 3 months, I wrote I'm not much to post on Facebook, but I did. I wrote it was like a 3-paragraph thing all about how, and I said, all about my experience. And I had, you wouldn't imagine, people from high school DMing me, people from college, people, acquaintances, all these people coming out of the woodwork saying, thank you so much for being honest about this. And that's when I realized, or after posting that, I realized, wow, so many people go through this. So many moms go through this, but no one talks about it, right? So back to how things were going. I did actually get a therapist during this time, but it was impossible to meet with the therapist. And this was virtual, but it was impossible to meet with them because I'd have an appointment set up for 12 o'clock. Well, anybody that has a newborn knows that there's no schedule. Right. So I try to have him asleep. Right? I'm going to have him asleep by 12 and then he'll sleep. And then he would just be screaming. And there was a couple times I just would have to pay the therapist whatever the money was, even though I didn't even have the session because...
You just log on and he's screaming. And you're like, see, this is why I need your help, but how can you help me?
Literally. So I wasn't even able to get the help. So I think I did that twice. And then I said, I'm so sorry, I can't do this. And that was like super loser. Like, who cannot even get a therapist? Who cannot even talk to a therapist for half an hour, right? And I knew it's what I needed the most. So at this point, we're a couple weeks in, and I was really not doing well. Not only was I having those thoughts at night, and one of you said this earlier, you said the problem with that feeling at night is that you are alone with your thoughts, right? There's no one to say, that's not true, Megan, or you're a great mom, or we're going to get through this. There's no one saying that. You're just spiraling, and you're looking at social media, and you're just...
because everybody's sleeping in their
Everybody's
nice,
sleeping.
cozy bed. Even the birds. You don't even have the birds
There's
to
no
hear.
one up. Yes.
Yeah.
There's no one up. So you're just stuck with these super unhealthy thoughts, and it's not good. I remember this entire time, my husband was very concerned, but he did not know how to help me. He'd never been with a new mom before, right? No one warned him that this might happen. And by the way, I had read all of the baby books. I was 35, 36 when I had my son. I was an older mom. I had watched all my friends have kids. Most of their kids were 10 years old, 5 years old, 10 years old. And no one had ever mentioned the word postpartum depression. I had read about baby blues in the book, What to Expect When You're Expecting. But the baby blues thing said exactly that you were crying, you just wanted to be with your baby at all times, you this, you that. That was not me. I remember thinking, like, do I have baby blues? No, that's not how I felt at all. I not only was not crying, I wanted to be away from my child. I wanted to be nowhere near him. Nowhere near him. Did not feel that bond. So all of this felt like, what the heck is going on? And Kevin's trying to figure it out, and neither of us knew what to do. I remember at one point, Kevin was working in the yard or something, and Ryan was in his crib, and Ryan was crying and screaming and clearly hungry. I was laying on our couch, and because Ryan was hungry and ready to go, my boobs were leaking milk all over the couch. And Kevin comes rushing in the door, and he says, Megan, Ryan's crying. Why aren't you go getting Ryan? And I'm like, I can't do it. And I remember I had such this like numb face, right? Of like somebody who was not mentally well, clearly. And he's like, Megan, what's wrong? Why aren't you getting Ryan? And I'm like, I can't do it. I don't want to do this. I don't want to be a mom. I can't do this. I can't get him. I can't feed him. And Kevin's bringing Ryan to me, and he's, Megan, please feed him. He needs food. And I could not do it. I refused to feed my own child. I mean, that's how sick I was. It makes me sick to think about it now. Not long after that, my friend, of course, this whole time my friends are texting me, Meg, how's it going? How are the newborn snuggles? How are this? How are that? And I'm just either lying and saying I'm great, or not texting back at all. So I'm seeing like all these texts coming through, which is stressful, like I want to get back to this friend, but I really don't because I have nothing good to share. And so one day my friend Renee called. Renee was not a mom. And she called, and I did not pick up the call. And I thought to myself, I'm not going to talk to anybody right now. All they're going to say is, how's the newborn? How's the baby? How are things going? Are you loving it? Is it the best time of your life? Are you enjoying it? And I thought, I'm not going through that. I do not want to be fake. I don't want to lie. I'm not doing it. And I was heading outside to lay in the hammock in my front yard. It was 95 degrees, of course, because it was, Southwest Florida, September. Mm-hmm. But I thought, I'm just going to go out there and go in the sunshine like everybody says to do. So I'm laying in the hammock, and I let the call go from Renee, and I thought to myself, I actually am going to call her back because she might talk to me about something other than being a mom.
Because she was not a mom.
Exactly.
So she may give you just whatever.
Yeah, let's talk about the weather.
Right.
Let's talk about the Yankees.
Right.
I don't care what it is. Let's talk about something other than motherhood because I am not enjoying this. So I call her back, and she says, hey, Meg. And I said, hi. And she's like, how's it going? And I'm like, I hate this. This is terrible. I hate being a mom. And in my head, I'm thinking she's going to say, ooh, you're a monster. Who would say something like that, right? That's, ooh, you... And she didn't. She didn't skip a beat. And she said, my aunt was like that. She actually had something called postpartum psychosis. She got the help that she needed. She went to a facility and ended up being the best mom ever and having a couple more kids. And that was the moment that turned everything around. Because I said, she did? Really? Somebody else has felt this way? She said, yeah, she couldn't stand being a mom. She was a monster. She felt like a monster. She did not bond with her child. It was terrible. And I said, there's other people that, because I hadn't even known what to Google, right? Like I didn't even know that was a thing. Never heard of the term. And I said, wow, I didn't even know that there were other moms out there that felt this way, that were having a hard time, that weren't enjoying motherhood. And she said, yeah, of course. That's I know for a fact my aunt went through this. So we talked a little while. And then, of course, it's the second I got off the phone with her, on to Google I went. And I was reading, and I knew that I was not experiencing postpartum psychosis, but I was probably pretty darn close.
So what's the difference?
So postpartum psychosis, and I'm not an expert on this, but is when you get into more of like a trance, for lack of a better word. And those, unfortunately, are the stories that you might hear of where a mother might kill her children because she thinks that the child is going to kill her, or...
Okay, yeah, so there's like a delusional aspect to it, I see.
Yeah, and it happens way more than you think. And what happens is when this happens in the news, everybody, of course, attacks the mom, because a lot of times children are harmed or killed, which is, of course, not acceptable and terrible. But then it'll come out later that they had postpartum psychosis and were either being treated or not treated. In fact, about probably a year ago, there was a news story that came out. A nurse who this happened to in Boston, and she was actively getting treatment for this postpartum psychosis. She had 3 kids. And then, unfortunately, you can look back at the news story, but she did kill her 3 children. Her husband came home to it. It was awful for everyone. And then she tried to commit suicide herself, but it did not work. So she is still alive. Her children have passed away, and her husband obviously is still alive. So it is a very tricky situation, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
Anyway, there was this outpouring of moms saying, yes, look, what happened was terrible and not acceptable. Not acceptable, of course, to do something like that. But this mom was trying to get help. She was actively getting help for this postpartum psychosis. And I remember that day that I found out, I was out of my postpartum. My son was already, he was past his first birthday and things like that. But I cried the entire day because I thought that very easily could have been me. Mm-hmm. Very, very easily. And it was just terrible to think that, she was trying to get help, and that, it still happened. So I'm starting to Google after I get off the phone with Renee, and I realize, I don't have postpartum psychosis, but I have postpartum depression. I'm reading all the things. Rage, regretting becoming a mom, feeling hopeless, feeling like you want to put the baby in the crib and walk away. I mean, all the things to a T. And I'm like, this is what I have. Immediately called my OBGYN. I made the appointment, and I went in. And I knew what would probably happen. My husband and I talked about it, and we knew that they would probably want to prescribe meds. Now, I'm the type of person, I don't even take Advil. I do not believe in Western medicine for the most part. I avoid it at all costs if I can. But I knew that this was going to be a matter of life and death for my son and I. And so my husband was great about it. He said, let's go on. Why don't you agree to it for 6 months, try for 6 months, and then you can get off of it. I said, okay, I can do that. I'm only going to be on it for 6 months, and then I can get off of it. So I go in, I get prescribed, and I started. I was on Zoloft, 25 milligrams, which is the lowest dose that you can take, the lowest dose that I know of that you can take. And they said, we'll start here, and we'll see how things go. I am super, super lucky and that it worked right away for me. I realize that it's not like that for most people who start on.
It's a couple weeks right before it can
oh my gosh, a couple weeks. It can make you go up and down. It can make your symptoms worse. I mean, it can be bad. So I just shout out to all those people out there that are trying to balance it, because I know it's not always as easy as my situation was. By day 2 of taking this pill, I felt better. I don't know if it was a placebo effect or it was truly the pills working, but they started working. I still was experiencing all of those difficult things of being a parent. I still was up all night. I still was this. He still was difficult in the car seat. but I wasn't numb. I was able to feel things that I hadn't felt before. I felt like, oh my gosh, I'm starting to bond with you. I love you. You're my son. I want to take care of you. I love you. This might get better. All those things. It was like the cloud was lifted, and I was able to really be myself. And my husband even said, like, this is my Megan. Like, this is you. You're you. You're smiling. You're happy. You're all these things. So I thought, great. This is wonderful. So my husband, at that time, like I said, he was a boat captain, and it was still very difficult, obviously. I'm experiencing all the newborn things, like we said. But my family was there helping. Everybody was so helpful. My mom. But I'll never forget, my husband his ship was headed through the Panama Canal, which is really exciting. And it was the first time going through, and he was all excited. And I'll never forget me saying, take me with you. I didn't want to be home stuck with this baby. Again, I had plenty of support, my mom, his mom, all these people helping my sister. But I did not want to be stuck with this baby, and here's my husband, furthering his career, doing something cool, going through the Panama Canal. And I really resented, not only did I resent him, I resented all the people, all these moms that were still working. All I wanted to do was go back to work. Everybody had told me, you're going to be so glad that you become a stay-at-home mom. You're going to be so glad you have that time together. You'll never get it back, blah, blah, blah. And in that moment, I felt the exact opposite. All I wanted was to go to work, to be on a schedule, to have PTO time, right? To take a sick day. I wanted to be earning money, because that's the difficult part too, is you're going through this every day and you're like, nobody's even paying me for this. This is right. Crazy. I'm pulling 24-hour days and you're not getting paid. And I know not everybody feels this way, and it's such a fulfilling thing for so many moms. But for me personally, it was not fulfilling me. Not only was it not fulfilling me, it was draining me. Mm-hmm. The meds start to kick in, things start to get better. And around the 4-month mark, is when they say that things start to, they start to roll over, they're smiling, they're laughing. That bonding really started to happen. But I stayed on my meds. So at the 6-month mark, we decide that I'm going to go off of the meds. And this was a decision between my OBGYN, my husband, and I. Because I was on such a low dose, I really didn't need that time period of, you have to wean yourself off of it. But the OBGYN said, you're on such a low dose, it can literally be where you're on it on a Tuesday and off it on a Wednesday. Not a big deal. But don't waver back and forth and take it one day and one not. So I went off of it. Unfortunately, I went off of it during a sleep regression that my son was having. Mm. And that was, looking back, I'm like, oh, that was a terrible idea. And within 12 hours, I was having those spiraling thoughts of, I don't want to do this. I don't want to be a mom. I was having that rage of, I would hear him. So at this point, he was, sleeping for naps, and of course, sleeping in his crib for naps and things like that. And I would hear him start to cry because he woke up, and I would feel that rage feeling. And I'm like, this is not good. So during that time that I had gone off the meds, my son was still having a very difficult time in the car seat, constant screaming. And so this was 6 months of that, right? And at one point, I got in the car and I thought to myself, or I was home and I thought to myself, that's it. I'm going to do it. I'm going to end my life and my son's too. And of course, I did not tell anybody, did not tell my husband. I just thought, I'm going to get in the car and I'm going to go in Southwest Florida. We have lots of canals, so I figured I'd pick a canal. I'm going to drive into the guardrail, and I'm going to flip the car, and that's going to be it. And then our pain is going to be over, because clearly I'm not a good mom, and so I just need to end this. And again, this is during that time period where I had gotten off my meds. So I get in my car and I'm driving. My street is a mile long. And I called my mom, and she heard it. She must have heard it in my voice, because she said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm in the car with Ryan." She could hear him screaming in the background, and she just knew. She said, I must have said something like, I'm frustrated with him crying, or I can't take this anymore, or something like this. And she said, Megan, stop the vehicle, turn the vehicle around, and go home and go put Ryan in his crib. And I'm so happy because in that moment I listened to her and I stopped the vehicle. I turned it around. I went home and I put him in his crib. And my mom and I have actually never spoken again about that moment.
Wow.
I think it's actually probably just too painful for her, for me. And it took me months to actually even tell my husband about that. He didn't know about it. And of course, when he found out, I mean, he was distraught, right? I mean, to hear that your wife was planning on doing something like that with your child is terrible. So that was definitely the lowest point. That was not good. And that was when I said, let's get back on these meds. Yeah. They're still in the medicine cabinet. Let's go get those things.
Your mom's intuition. Wow. Like,
Weird.
yeah.
Pretty weird.
Yeah.
Because I definitely did not say, like, I'm about to go do something bad, or...
Because she knew you were off your meds and it was soon.
Yeah, and I don't even know if she knew I was off my meds.
Oh, wow.
I must have sounded not right.
Yeah.
I think I was in that, like, mode that I had been in months prior, where I sounded kind of like a zombie, and I was very, like, emotionless. I think that's what she must have recognized. It's all I can think of, you know? Mm-hmm. But yeah, she said, turn the vehicle around. And I could hear it in her voice, like, and she never talks like that. You know, my mom's the sweetest person. Turn the vehicle around, go put the child in the crib. And that's that. Yeah, so that saved my life and my son's life. So I went back on the meds and finished out up until a year. I breastfed him through his first birthday, and then I decided to get off the pills a couple days later. Obviously, I was nervous about getting off of the pills and stopping breastfeeding, because I know that can be a big hormonal time. But thankfully, both of those things went very, very well. So that was wonderful. By that point, you know, my son was a year. Our bond was amazing. My son just turned 3 a couple weeks ago. Our bond is amazing. I truly am proof that even though you might not have that bond in the beginning, it can be done. I love him more than anything in the world. It's crazy. And it's so sad for me to think about the feelings that I had and the things that I had thought about doing. But we're in a great place now.
Do you think in the future you would ever share this story with your son?
Yeah, I definitely will. I have no problem with this being out there because, number one, if I'm knowing that it's helping other women and other moms, that's the most important thing in the world. And number two, I think it's okay for him to see his mom and know that his mom struggled through something, right? I think that being honest at an age-appropriate time is healthy. And I think that it's okay for him to know Mommy had a tough time and Mommy got the help that she needed and Mommy got better.
Yeah, and that in the future too, he can reflect on that story and he can be a more supportive husband when he has a child in the future.
Yeah,
yes.
And see the signs.
Of course. And also, to me, yes, I was getting help for postpartum depression and I went on Zoloft, but this goes for everything in life, right? Like if you are having a hard time, even if you're ashamed, even if you don't want to, reach out for help. And it could totally change your life, which it did for me. So I'm totally okay with him knowing that Mommy was brave enough to say that, look, I'm sick. I'm really, really sick and I need to get better, which sometimes is harder than like the physical getting sick and I need to get better, right? Like admitting that you feel like a monster of a mom and that you need help and you need to get better. That's hard. It's embarrassing. It's very, very, very shameful. So yeah, I'm totally cool with him knowing. Fast forward to us thinking that we might want to have another child. And I definitely wanted to, and so did my husband. We had real concerns of this happening again, of course, right? Is it selfish to do this again? It's selfish to do this to our current child. My husband was terrified that, that I would hurt myself, that it would reemerge, as was I, completely terrified. And I looked it up. With your second pregnancy, if you've had PPD before, the chances of having it again actually go up by 30%.
Oh, wow.
Scary. And I'm sure it's because you're already dealing with, probably a toddler. You're already dealing with life. So I can see how that would happen. So it took many months for us to even agree to try to conceive again. And that took a lot of long conversations between Kevin and I, conversations with my OBGYN, and that includes me going to my OBGYN, and I said to her, I was terrified to do this, but I knew I had to. I sat in the office and I said, as you know, I had postpartum depression before, but no one really knew how bad it was, right? Like I wasn't reporting any of this stuff to anybody, so my OBGYN didn't know about my
detail.
In detail. Who's going to? I'm not going to sit and say, I had this thought the other night. So I kind of said to her, just so you know, it was really, really bad. And I kind of gave some details. And I said, I just want to know if this were to happen again and we're to have another child, if I have these bad thoughts, what will happen if I go into a facility to get help for these things? And she said, I'm so glad you asked. Our goal is to keep baby with the family. So if you need help, you'd go to this facility and get help. Baby would stay with dad, grandparents if they're there helping, whatever. But then as soon as you are ready and able to get back with that child, you can reunite with your family. And that's all I needed to hear. I wanted to know that I wouldn't get taken away by DCF and deemed an unfit mother, because that was what was going in my mind. I was like, if I admit any of this, if you admit any of those things, you are not only a monster, you could be deemed an unfit mother. Who is going to trust you with a child and a baby?
Take your kid.
Take your kid.
Right.
I would.
Sure.
I would take the child away. That's not a safe situation. So hearing that from her was what I needed to know. Okay, so if I ask for this help, this very serious help, my children will not be taken away from me forever, right? So that was wonderful, and that kind of gave me permission to move on. So then we decided, okay, we're okay to conceive. We're okay to do this. It's going to be great. I did a couple of things that I want to share that might help other people. I had a therapist. During this time, I had gotten a therapist who is wonderful, and she had helped me work through a lot of these things. And part of what we worked on was picking out a facility to go to. And this particular facility is on the east coast of Florida. So we have the name. I emailed the name of the facility and the website to my husband, and I literally said, in case PPD hits again, right? So that he would have it. I wanted to be as prepared as possible. I also sent a text message out to probably 15 of my closest friends. Very difficult for me to send out this text because, again, believe it or not, there's still a lot of shame with it. I still feel weird about it in some ways, but the more I talk about it, the better it is. But in that text, I shared a lot of those personal things just so my friends could kind of know how serious it was. But I'm going to share with you the last part that I said to them. But here's where I'm reaching out for help. Please bother me. Please check on me. Please annoy me. Don't ask just the general questions. How are you? How's baby? There's nothing wrong with these questions. But I know from experience that there is so much shame, and I felt like such a monster that I lied to everyone that asked me. Ask me how my mental state is. Ask me if I find myself frustrated with baby. Ask me if I am feeling rage. Ask me if I have bad thoughts at 2 a.m. while breastfeeding alone. Ask me if I feel like I'm spiraling. And then later on I said, should you ever feel like I'm acting strangely or are concerned, here are some contacts. And I gave them my husband's contact number, my sister's contact number, and my mom's contact number. I said, and you can always call 911, or even better, offer to take me to the ER, which the OBGYN said is an option. I said, again, this is really hard for me to write all this, but trying to lean on the people that love me and want the best for me. And the response that I got was, of course, wonderful and very supportive from all my friends. But more, it was me putting it out there. It was accountability for myself. Mm-hmm. Now these 15 people know the entire truth, and they're going to be watching you like hawks. Mm-hmm. Any little thing that you say, that you don't say, I knew that I needed that invasive, those invasive questions from people for me to really tell the truth. And sure, you could still lie, you could still this, you could that, but hopefully those things I could be at least honest to one of those people and say, no, you know what? I'm really angry, I'm really frustrated, or this or that. So that was wonderful. And I just think that would help if anybody's going through it for a second time, for a second child. I think that could be helpful.
Even a first time, just saying,
totally.
Hey, I'm, concerned because it's so prevalent. My friend had a baby recently, and after our pre-interview, I thought, I'm going to ask her how she's doing. How are you? How are you mentally? I know this is a hard time for new moms. How are you feeling? Do you need anything?
Yes.
And she said, actually it's really tough. I'm not sleeping, and
she was honest.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I'm so glad that I had spoken to you, because normally it's like, oh my God, those cheeks and that baby.
Right.
And
right. And all that's great.
So beautiful.
It's true.
But everybody else is saying that.
Right.
Everybody else is commenting on the picture.
Yes.
Oh, this snuggles the baby. Da, 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 da.
Mm-hmm.
I want to know. I text you privately and I want to know, how are you?
Yes.
Yeah,
and even when moms are honest and say, I'm sleep deprived, I'm feeling terrible, I know, because this was me when I heard other moms say this. You think to yourself, well, this was before I had a child, but I would think to myself, sleep deprived, how hard can it be, right?
Right.
Like, of course, you're up with the baby. Oh, you're up with the baby. How hard is it? And then when you do it, you're like, this is actual torture, being up with a child all night.
I think it's that and the combination of the hormone fluctuations.
Yes, the hormones fluctuation.
Hormones for women literally dictate our lives.
Absolutely. And they're going nuts after that.
So you said something earlier about prevalence. I found a statistic I just wanted to share. Mm-hmm. It says, according to the NIH, suicide is a leading cause of death in the perinatal period, which includes pregnancy and 1 year postpartum, and accounts for about 20% of postpartum deaths. I thought that was pretty staggering.
It is, and you don't hear about it.
No.
Like, since when
You just hear about the moms on the news.
Of course.
The people who make the news that are going through the psychosis.
Exactly.
The depression part.
Exactly. No one
Because I feel like there's probably such a range of depression. Everybody's dealt with it.
Yes.
I'm sure you dealt with a little, Stephanie, of postpartum depression after
Yes.
your third one was born, when your first was going through cancer. I mean, it's a situational
I can't even imagine.
depression.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, and anxiety. Then there's postpartum anxiety, which is a whole other arm. And I've had some friends talking about that anxiety of, it's normal in the first week or whatever, but my child's going to die. I can't let anybody be, they're going to get sick. They're going to get, just being anxious about every little thing, that so much so that it takes over your life. It takes over debilitating. Mm-hmm. And that is just as bad, right? I mean, it's a different kind of pain where it's just, the anxiety is terrible.
So it just so happens, I shared this with you earlier, but it's just weird how this all lined up. We've had interviews this month with several different moms, and we shared our own stories. September is not only Childhood Cancer Awareness Month, which was about my story. Our episode that's about to come out this week is all about NICU, a NICU stay. September's also NICU Awareness Month. And today I found out that it is Suicide Awareness and Prevention Month and Maternal Suicide Awareness Month. And the first week of September was Maternal Suicide Awareness Week. So I just thought that was really interesting how this all lined up, because we did not plan that at all.
I love it. Well, the biggest thing, and hopefully the month and the week being dedicated to that, is that I've been thinking about what would I tell people, or how might this help other people, talking about it, right? That's why once I started talking about it and being honest, so many people come out of the woodworks. I went through that. My mom went through that. I did happen. This happened. This happened. And then you're like, so many people are going through this, but not talking about it. Why? Because it's shame. You feel shame. And also because, again, women are supposed to be this nurturing, maternal, loving. So then when you're not that, you don't want to tell anybody, right? Why would you?
You're a failure.
You're a failure. So it's so important to talk about it, because that's the only way other people are going to feel like they're not the only one. And it's important to talk about it because that's how you're going to get help. And maybe the help doesn't mean going on meds. Hopefully you can get help, before you have to go to the meds thing. Maybe just therapy, maybe just meeting with a support group, whatever it is. But talking about it and being honest about what's going on and saying things out loud is the biggest, I think, one of the first steps. Mm-hmm. Another thing that I've learned, I think it was one of my therapists that said this. She said, it's okay to admit that you hate the newborn stage, right? And I'm like, huh? She said, yeah. It doesn't mean that you hate the newborn. It doesn't mean you hate your child. You just don't like the stage that they're in. And I'm like, oh. So we did these practices where I would just scream, I hate the newborn stage. I hate the newborn. And it was the most freeing thing to be able to say it out loud. I did not like this stage in my life and in my child's life. Doesn't mean I hate my child. Doesn't mean I don't love my child. I love my child, but this stage was not fun. It was not the best for me, and that's okay. And so that I found really helpful. I find really helpful too. I just had my second child 8 weeks ago, and I'm okay with saying this stage is not fun. I do not like it. I know I'm going to get through it and it's going to get better, but I do not like the newborn stage. And that's okay for me to say that. It does not make me a monster. It does not make me a bad mom. I hate the newborn stage. It's almost over. And then it will get better. It truly will get better. And everybody says that. And when you're in the stage and you don't believe it, now after going through it, now I can see, yes, there is a light at the end of the tunnel. It does get better, but it is okay. Just like it's okay for somebody to say, I didn't like when my kids were in their teenager stage, right? Why does that seem okay to say that?
Right.
But saying it about a newborn, you're like, oh, this person's kind of not a good mom to be saying. No, I'm just saying I don't necessarily love that period of time with the child.
I didn't like necessarily so much my daughter until she was about 4.5 years old.
Wow.
I loved her dearly.
And to admit that is okay.
But like when she was about 4.5 is when she was like a little kid and I could reason with her and she was no longer difficult.
Yes.
And, yelling and freaking out over the littlest thing anymore. She was just like, calm down. And I'm like, I really like you.
Oh, I love that.
But until
then you loved her.
Yes. I guess saying you didn't like her is a hard thing to say. It's not necessarily that 100%, but all the time. I didn't like her all the time.
Of course. And maybe it's just that your bond changed. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like maybe you were able to create a different type of bond where you're like, oh my gosh, you can do this with me. And
I can see her as a little human now rather than...
we can talk about the world.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Totally.
Just being like a needy parasite.
Yes.
Pretty much
and that's
is
okay
how it
to
felt.
say that. And that's okay
I know.
to joke like
people
that.
have looked at me like I'm crazy when I refer to kids as parasites sometimes, but I'm like, they cannot survive without you.
Exactly.
Therefore, you are the host.
Yes, and that's okay to say that because you know what? That's what people are thinking.
Right.
So to not say this stuff out loud is actually so damaging and so it's just detrimental for everyone's mental health. But then when you're honest about it and you say, no, you know what? That was a rough stage or we didn't really bond until this period. That's okay.
Yeah,
right.
It's okay.
That's okay.
It just means you're honest.
Yes.
Doesn't mean I'm going to hurt my kid or I'm going to do anything or not want to be with them forever. It's just this particular one kid was a really difficult little thing until she was about 4.5. And then she was freaking awesome.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you might be the type of person that you enjoy when she's 18, 19 years old, when a lot of people will be like, oh, that was terrible, and they were this and they were that, and that's okay, right?
Now she's a teenager, and she's got a little bit of a toot, but overall she's pretty lovely.
Yes, you're enjoying that. When most parents would say that was the worst time of their life, right?
I mean, I still have a lot of teen life left, teen years to go. We'll see.
Right.
But currently, we can like reel her back in a lot easier than we used to, and she's pretty cool.
I don't want to deter anybody from having children by having these conversations.
Not at all, but I think it's okay to talk about it and be honest.
Yeah.
Well, that's why this is called a podcast for moms.
That's right.
Because you're already a mom. It's too late, friends. Ha ha. Here we are.
It's true. The two other suggestions that I would have is stay off the internet and social media if you can. Mm-hmm. I have stayed off. I don't have a personal Instagram, but I have it for work and I have to use it for work. but I avoid it at all cost, and it's been wonderful.
Unless it's groups that are honest,
Of course.
and real,
Of
like
course.
the real
Support
talk.
groups. If you
like
find
real talk
if you
moms.
find it helpful, sometimes you get into those groups and then you're just seeing all these things.
True.
That, you know what I mean?
True. No,
but
you're right.
You know in your head, like,
Yeah. Or just stay off. You're probably right.
When I finish scrolling or when I finish being in this group, looking at things in this group, do I feel better about myself or no? Because you're right. There's certainly groups where you're like, oh my gosh, this mom did this and that's super helpful or whatever.
Right.
Victoria
or
and
dealing
I,
with it too.
Victoria and I used to talk during our breastfeeding journeys that there was this one particular group where it was like, it was so helpful because you knew if you were up at 3 a.m, a lot of them were up at 3 a.m. at the same time. So if you go to this group to ask a question about your breastfeeding struggles, you're bound to you're not completely, don't feel completely alone because somebody is going to answer you.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you could find buddies that you could be like, oh, can I text you in the middle of the night?
Struggle.
Yeah.
Yes. We can struggle together.
Totally.
Yeah. They helped me. I didn't find Facebook groups. You told me about this particular group when I was breastfeeding my third when she was an infant, like brand new, fresh out the womb infant.
Oh.
And it was so helpful to me. My first 2 years, first two kids, with breastfeeding was very difficult at the beginning. And with this one, although still difficult, still chop nips, the whole deal. But I knew that this was not a me or a her problem.
Yes.
This was just one of the part of normal,
It's just all part
normal
of it.
part of breastfeeding that some
So
people
true.
go through.
Yep.
And joining that group changed everything. I was able to nurse her for so much longer than I did the other two. And then the fourth one, I nursed her for 3.5 years. It was just like a breeze. I did go through the struggles at the beginning, just like the last kids, but so much more helpful because those groups were all like-minded, like situational. Did that make sense? Like situational.
Yeah.
Same situation.
And people being honest, like
Correct.
you said. The key is
But you can't when you find yourself in like my husband calls the doom scroll.
Yeah.
When you just scroll
It's not
mindlessly,
good.
Comparison
scroll
mode.
and
comparison.
Yeah.
Well, that was the last thing I was going to say was comparison is the thief of joy.
Yep.
Yes, it is.
And I have it taped to a thing next to my nursing chair because when you start comparing your child and your situation or your motherhood to other people, it's not good for anybody, right? And I think a lot of moms realize that the second time around is that I cannot start comparing my child, their milestones that they're meeting or not meeting, whether or not they are crying at this point, whether or not they're, liking the car seat at this point, all those things. And you really try to have to put those things aside and remember, like, my child is perfect the way they are. And they're like this for a reason. They're beautiful. I was meant to be their mother, all those things, rather than comparing them to, others on social media or wherever, a few other children that you've had. Yeah.
And you feel after this baby, did you get sprinklings of feeling down or
Good
anything?
question. In the beginning, I felt great. Just the past 2 weeks, I've started to feel like frustrated moments, for sure. But I think those are more just normal frustrated moments that parents are. But I have it like on lockdown in my head. I'm like, is this a PPD feeling or is this just a normal? I'm frustrated as a parent moment. When my friends are checking in and people are checking in, I'm being completely honest, and I'll say, last night I was frustrated and this, that, and the other thing, and and that really helps. Just having that accountability of being honest about those feelings, and so. With me being, super cognizant of what's going on in my head and these thoughts that I'm feeling, and also everybody around me, hopefully we can catch it if it does happen. But so far, so good. No PPD feelings. So that's
great.
The way that I'm thinking about it is I could have those feelings next week. I could have them in 8 months, right? Like, there's no guarantees, but I wake up every day and I think to myself, I'm thankful because today I do not have those PPD feelings. And I might have them tomorrow, and that would be crappy. But today I do not, and I'm thankful for that.
And you have a plan.
And I have a plan. That's right.
Yeah, you were not prepared to feel this way. You didn't know that this was going to be a thing for you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I have a plan and I have resources.
Wow.
Yeah.
Really appreciate you being here and your vulnerability. It takes a lot for a person to have these hard discussions. And I know that something came out of this. Something positive came out of this and gave you purpose. So do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. I had mentioned that I loved working and I missed being around people and things like that. So I knew I would eventually go back to work or do something. During my time with Ryan, I'll never forget that I'd be sitting in the nursing chair at 2 a.m, looking around the room, and I'd see all the stuff that we had. The onesies from people, the socks, the blankets, all these things, which were wonderful gifts, don't get me wrong. Super thankful for them. But I remember thinking in my head, I would give all of these things up for actual help, right? Because in my worst PPD moments, I mean, I told you I couldn't even get up to feed him, let alone get up to make myself a nutritious meal or put the dishes away from the dishwasher or change the laundry or things like that. I could physically not get up to do it. And not only was the PPD a cause for that, but just in general, being a mom, like I said, when you're cluster feeding, it is nearly impossible to keep everything sorted and where it needs to go. And I know that people love to say things like, don't worry about the house, or don't this, or don't worry about that. And that's great to say, but it's not realistic.
No.
You can say, don't worry about the dishes. Who's going to unload the dishwasher then? If you have a partner, and they're back to work, then they're not there helping you with those things. So who's going to unload the dishwasher? Okay, it's great to say don't worry about the laundry. Who's going to make sure there's clean laundry for me and my child?
We have no underwear.
Right, we have no underwear. We nursing bras. Just simple things
Leaking
like that.
all over your sheets.
Right. Exactly. And that's the thing. You need to clean your sheets. Basic human things to survive day to day. It's not realistic to say, don't worry about those things. I'm not worried about it. They just need to happen.
Right.
Somehow. Because of this, I thought to myself, I would pay somebody to come in here and do this. And so the idea for Rattled was formed. And I thought, what if we had a team of moms who could go in and help other moms with these things and know what to do immediately and not have to ask any questions. No small talk, no, hey, how are you feeling today? Hey, oh, you have bags under your eyes today. Nope, none of that. Just go in and know what to do and leave the house as is. That was the biggest thing, too, was, there'd be shoes by the door, there'd be this, there'd be that, the sink would be full of dishes, and I'd say, I need somebody to come in and do all of these things. So what we do is we go in, the frying pan is still on the oven with the egg in it, we will take care of all of those, clean up everything, and I don't know about you guys, but I feel so much better when the house is tidied up and clean and clear. And to me, that helps my mental health. So that's our whole goal, is to do all these things for mom and for dad so that everything is, so that then they can focus on the big things, which are their children, right? Ideally, maybe take a nap. So it's called Rattled Concierge. rattledconcierge.com, and then you can find us on Instagram, rattled.concierge, and on Facebook, rattled.concierge. And please, if anyone feels like they could use this service, I would love to gift a visit for you for free. If you email me at hello@rattledconcierge.com and just let me know you heard this podcast, and I'd be happy to set you up with a visit. It has changed people's lives as far as just taking that mental load off and allowing them to, spend more time with their kids or their families, or like I said, take a nap, things like that. But yeah, would love to help out other moms and families.
Beautiful. This is such a beautiful service, especially for those really early months and early weeks of just being so frustrated.
Surviving.
Yeah, I love this.
Yeah, I love this too.
It's a great gift to give to people for a baby shower, or just, if you live out of state and don't know how to help them, people have really been blessed through it.
Do you do wonderful. Like packages, like 2 or 3 visits or something?
Exactly.
That's amazing.
Yeah, packages, and they can get on like a weekly plan or whatever is helpful for them. And yeah, it's been but not only is it a blessing to them, but it's really a blessing to me again, it's the whole family. It's not just the mom, but especially when a mom walks in and she goes, and sees that, the dishes are put away, and there's nothing like that, knowing that you helped out another tired, exhausted mom that is doing her best to take care of her family. It's just it's so rewarding.
We love that. Yeah. We're big on finding your purpose through your struggle. So that lines up wonderfully with our mission. Thank you so much for coming in.
Yay, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And
Awesome.
I'm just thrilled to be able to talk about this and hopefully get the conversation going among other moms.
Thank you for listening. You can find us on Facebook at I Can't Even Imagine, a podcast for moms, and on Instagram at ICEI_podcast, and all of your favorite podcast networks. Thank you for listening.
Bye.
Bye.